Okay, so maybe to start, I would like to give Ms. Braun, Dr. Braun, the opportunity to introduce herself, tell us something about your work here at Leuphana, and then after you, maybe we go to Professor Lang for a similar introduction.
Okay. Well, first of all, I would like to thank you for inviting me. I'm here as a member of the Network Gender and Diversity Research of the Leuphana University that was founded this year. I work in the Equal Opportunities Office, and there I coordinate a mentoring program for female academic researchers. So, besides, I work as a researcher on the issues of class, gender, and racism. So, well, that is to my person. I would like to present a little bit about the network which I am representing today here. The Gender and Diversity Research Network is a trans and interdisciplinary network of researchers, of faculty members, employees, and students dealing with gender and diversity issues. So, here in the Leuphana, it is a scientific but also a university policy-oriented network. With the purpose to foster interdisciplinary and institutional dialogue, as well as the cooperation with other universities and institutions. So, we want to promote a diversity-sensitive research and a diversity-sensitive teaching in order to create an academic and as well as a social environment where diversity and gender awareness can take place. So this is the brief description of what we are doing, and we would like to invite also the students. And I would also like to present, we will make an event that will take place, I don't know, I think every month, every second month. Here's my help, which calls 10 minutes of diversity and gender studies. So there we will present, students and academic researchers will present their issues, their teams, and will discuss on their field, on the different fields, 10 minutes and reflections on gender and diversity. So you will hear from the network and on every second month. Oh, week. So, twice a month.
Professor Lang, maybe a couple words from your side, because the audience didn't have the chance to listen to you earlier today.
Okay. My name is Daniel Lang. I'm a professor at the same institute as Bertha Martin Lopez. I think this is one of the reasons why I'm sitting here. It's the Institute of Ethics and Transdisciplinary Sustainability Research. Maybe a second reason why I'm sitting here is because of the denomination of my professorship, which includes, on the one hand side, two words or two concepts that will accompany you throughout the Leuphana Bachelor. Therefore, I think it's pretty good to sit here. It's on the one hand side transdisciplinarity. You have probably heard this already one or two times. This will continue. And hopefully I can make or give you a sense during this podium discussion that it's not only boring to have such a complex thing like transdisciplinarity, and the second one is sustainability. And hopefully I'm not only sitting here because to avoid that you have too many prejudices against these two concepts. I hope that I can also present you that these two concepts or guiding ideas, sustainability and transdisciplinarity, are closely linked to this idea of diversity, because from my perspective, if we don't embrace these two concepts, sustainability and transdisciplinarity, and if we don't really embrace diversity, we don't really reach this huge goal of sustainability and sustainable development.
Thank you for your introduction. To get the discussion started, maybe you brought up a couple of buzzwords already. So we talked a lot about diversity, of course, today. can we, and if, how can we talk about diversity without using stereotypes, without using any prejudices, and how can we achieve that in both daily life and in an academic discourse that we try to get to here? Yeah, please.
Okay, thanks. I try to start. I think it's absolutely impossible to talk about diversity without using stereotypes or prejudices. I think, clearly think it's not possible. It's simply not possible. Why? Because normal talking always means using concepts, and talking in a comprehensible way, talking to others, always means using concepts, using categories that can be understood. And using such concepts that can be understood always means to neglect diversity. All concepts, all words we use are universalizations, are neglecting some or other differences, some or other aspects of diversity. That's sort of a point from philosophy of language, very abstract point, but that's the first, the basic reason in my view, according to my view, that in any instant, when I start to talk, I use concepts, and that means I begin to use stereotypes of some or other kind. That's the more basic reason. A second point is, if I'm trying to do in my research, for instance, or when you are doing student papers then and assignments, when you try to give a critical analysis of some diversity aspects, for example, you're going to write a paper at the end of your semester, you're going to write a paper about feminism and gender diversity, for example, then if you try to give a critical analysis, you have to use those concepts, you have to reproduce those concepts you tried to analyze and you try to criticize. For example, if you're going to write a paper about the social construction of gender, or even the social construction of sex, I know it's a very point we have to discuss about, but if you're going to try, or if you're going to write a paper, an assignment about critical race in the field of critical race studies, when giving a critical analysis of, for example, racist structures, you have to coin and you have to use and reuse all these terms, sort of terms that have been used before in racist contexts, and you never get completely rid of those contexts when reproducing and reusing those concepts. Thus, according to my view, it is clearly impossible to talk about diversity without using stereotypes. Then, of course, you may ask what to do then. What shall we do? That's always the question young students ask me. Then, okay, they say, we learned this from you, and what now? How can I talk anymore again? How can I write anymore again, given this analysis you gave us? And that means there is absolutely no innocent talk about, no innocent research about diversity. You always are entangled in social structures, in power structures, in structures they are not equal, structures wherein humans are not equal. And I think it's a mistake or it would mean to lie, or to be colorblind, or race blind, or something like that, to neglect all those injustice and all those stereotypes that exist. That means in your research you have to try again and again to talk in a way that you can feel responsible for, but that never means you can talk without using stereotypes. That never means you are able to talk in an innocent way. Sorry for taking so much time, but it's the point I'm very concerned with, you see.
Yes, very clear. For me, I would like to point out from the educational perspective, very easy words. All human beings are different from each other, that's true. Now it's your job to identify the relevance of categories in each context, in each situation which you have in your daily life or your teaching life. For example, what we had a couple of hours ago, playing soccer, ethnicity or social background is not necessary to pay attention to this, yes? But you need, if you are a teacher or a trainer, you need a creative method to give all of them a sense of achievement for all pupils in your team or in the group. And that's what we need. And theoretical theme is the concept of intersectionality. That's the most important thing, to combine the different social categories which we have in our society. And the society has a structure of power. That's what you said already. It's a problem. Or it's a challenge we have already to give equal opportunities to all of the people. Also that's. I would like to point out that diversity competence is the most important competence you will have in school or in clubs or in other jobs.
Yeah. Okay, so I completely agree that if we put it in words and give a verbal talk, that we always have to deal with stereotypes, and we need to be quite careful what we say, really. But on the other hand, if you think about empirical research, for example, what I have presented, there are gaps, gender gaps between employment rates, between earnings. This is simply an empirical observation. There's not a researcher who states women should earn lower income than men. It's simply an observation for hundreds of years, and then we need to understand why does it occur. I think this is a little bit a different approach if you have an empirical research question, how to explain something. And if we go more directly then into empirical statistical research, you need to generate some variables you can measure. And these variables need to express diversity. And you will get to know some of these statistical measures in the next few terms in statistics and mathematics. For example, simply a standard deviation, which gives you information about differences in the distribution in age or with migration background. And I think this is a little bit different research approach, because then it's simply technical. There are no stereotypes in the variable. It's simply how to measure it. And I think this is a little bit different from this point of view. On the other side, if you have theoretical models, you put in so many assumptions, and then it's against stereotypes. I completely agree with that, of course.
Maybe Ms. Braun first.
I think that a really important thing in your question was also the daily life. So it is, I think, to separate the sphere of research and the sphere of the everyday is, regarding to the thing of diversity, a really difficult thing, because of course, we have to be aware of essentializing categories, which means reduce the person to a characteristic, but at the same time we have to keep in mind what is the goal of talking about diversity and differences. And maybe we can look back where these issues come from. They come from the civil rights movements, they come from feminist and from black movements. So I think that the goal is to live in equity, equality in the everyday life, and is to promote social justice. What does that mean? I think it is, on the one hand, is to develop what you have said already, is to develop this diversity sensibility. And I think that the university and especially the classroom is the right place to train those competences. I think that to develop this sensibility for different life situations, ways of seeing and experiencing things, is the most important thing. And in the research of diversity, it is to a constructivistic perspective on the construction of worlds. So it means, on the other hand, to reflect how differences are constructed in the everyday and to reflect how I look at people, how we are doing differences. It is really a political, or my perspective here is a really political one. And besides the thing of doing differences, it is also to think about the democratic constitution. I know this is a really meta thing now, but I think that the issue of difference is really, really important in these times. So we can't say that academia is a thing that is just discussing the issue about categories. I think it is really important to question the forms we're living together and to create an environment where new commons can arise, and also beyond the idea of fixed identities and of fixed categories. I think that is one central goal that we have in diversity research also.
Professor Hobus.
Thanks. Perhaps a short remark. We got the task to have a debate. I'm trying to not agree. Perhaps we can find a bridge between what you call the mere empirical research on the one hand and that more theoretical or say speculative or whatever theoretical research on the other hand. What I am doing, perhaps there's a bridge, or there might be seen a bridge when you say, okay, for example, there's this research about the gender gap. And you said, okay, it's mere empirical research, but in order to conduct this research, empirical research about the gender gap, of course you must know what is a man, you must know what is a woman. And of course there are many assumptions that are premises that come into your research design that's completely okay, but that are not reflected in any way. And these are the premises, the assumptions. You know who is a man, and you know who is a woman. Perhaps the humans ascribe these sexual categories to themselves, and they know as well. Perhaps most of us will know whether we are men or whether we are women. But of course, there's this category that gets into this empirical research. Of course, it's not researched in this design, and that's of course quite okay, unless it would make no sense at all. But I think there's the bridge between these two types of research: the thinking about the categories, and then the mere empirical research. But this empirical research needs or trusts the categories that are there.
So we can get now our debate. No, not really. I didn't meant with theoretical models your research. I meant also my own research. These are two different approaches. One researcher, for example me, carries out. One is the theoretical aspect. And of course, I completely agree. That was the reason why I also presented the theoretical background earlier before I came to the empirical results. Because without theory, what can we really learn from empirical findings? We need to know theories, why differences might occur. But these are not statements, it is like that, but these are only assumptions which then can be tested, or rather, let's say hypotheses, which are then tested empirically. So I completely agree, no debate about that, that it needs to be combined. Otherwise, it's ignorant empirical research one does. So, of course, you always need to know the background, the institutions in the country, the cultural norms in the country. There are interesting differences between, still now, between East and West German women. So in the 90s, some guys from social science did research and find out it's completely different how mothers in West Germany and East Germany think about working life. In West Germany, there was, so this is not my research, I can only state what others have found out. You are mother or you are worker. This is more the West German concept. The East German concept was, of course, you are mother and worker. And this has been pushed by socialism. So I'm not a guy who wants to propose socialism is very good and we should change everything to go back to the DDR. But of course, these are institutions, social norms, policy measures, which can influence norms. And changing norms is really a long-lasting task. We cannot, for example, observe in empirical data that women, where their own mother worked, are more likely to work full-time later on. If the mother has stayed at home during childhood and teenager age, women are later on less likely to be full-time employed. And this also transmission of norms, of preferences in the family, which are important and can be traced back to cultural background, social norms, social roles, gender identity, and so on. Then you have mentioned gender, and in empirical research we really need to be careful because we cannot really make studies about gender because this is rather a concept where everyone can put a mark in between and says, yeah, I'm a quarter woman and 3/4 man or whatever, which is complicated to deal with empirically. So conceptually it's very important, but empirically it's not easy to measure, if at all. So we have biological sex differences, man versus woman, and newer research also looks at sexual orientation. Are lesbians different from heterosexual women? Are homosexual men different from heterosexual men? And we really find differences in job choice, occupation choice, and all this kind of stuff. This is also being done in research. So. I think I have now stressed my minutes. So.
Is there something on your mind you want to add right away?
Yes. Well, I think an important point is why are we anyhow talking about this? I think this is also a key. Why are we talking about? And lucky me, I have the sustainability head here. I think it's crucially important that we live in a time, if we get out of our comfort zone, we live in a time of transition where we have major problems society, this world have to deal with. And some of these challenges are because we live in a diverse world, but we also live in an unjust world, where kind of people made use out of this difference. And I think if we acknowledge this, then it's kind of, yes, we need to deal with this problem that we talk different languages, that we have empirical research we need to use, but we also need to bring these different insights together to really tackle these challenges out there, be it climate change, be it the refugees challenge we currently have, etc., etc., etc. And we can't stop in just saying, well, okay, now we have to integrate the refugees, but we have to understand, and there I clearly see that we have to also uncover all the stereotypes and all the ways we kind of live in our current type. If we really want to solve this refugees problem or kind of cope with this refugees problem, well, we also have to understand, well, why are the people coming here? What are our contributions to this entire thing? This is not yet that much about talking, but if we really want to cope with these challenges, we need to start exactly having discourses as we have it here, because we need empirical evidence if we want to deal with issues like climate change. There is empirical evidence, but there is also different perspectives of different people coping with climate change, and we also need to integrate this. And one important thing from my perspective, and I fully agree that there will be always stereotypes when we talk, if we look at the language. The first thing I think is important that we reflect on these stereotypes. And the second important thing, and I realized this if I work together with different disciplines, but also if we try to work together at this interface between science and society. I think an important thing we often not acknowledge is that we first look at the differences. We first try to understand the differences before we start integrating. That we acknowledge, well, there is a difference, and what can we learn from the others? And how can we then integrate?
Thank you very much. When we think about these differences in, for example, in people, actually tomorrow we will have practical input from the founder of Auticon, which is an IT company that has focused on employing autistic persons who are often having special abilities in analytical thinking, in logical thinking. Is this kind of integrating these people a positive role model for other companies or organizations that can serve as a positive example? Please.
At first, I would say yes. From a micro level, micro means from the perspective of the firm, it might make sense, because if these autistic people have special skills, why shouldn't use these skills? It's related again to productivity, and if they're better able to do a specific job, every employer would be crazy not to recruit them. And what I want to say is that it might also be helpful, again, in changing norms and stereotypes. For example, a norm that someone who is autistic cannot work on a regular basis or something like that. If enough people see, that's not true. They only need to have specific jobs. We have talked earlier about it, that they have like job consultants or something within the firm. So some other employees who have the job to help and integrate them in the firm for these specific jobs. And this can, of course, also help in a long-term perspective to change these stereotypes. They cannot do it. Because if enough people observe, yeah, they can do these specific jobs perfectly. And today there was, again, the Economic Nobel Prize announced, and there was one Nobel Prize winner, John Nash, a mathematician, game theory, the early 90s, who was also an autist. But for this kind of job, doing research, mathematical models, wasn't harmful for him until a specific state. Perhaps you have seen the movie Beautiful Mind. This is the Nobel Prize winner, Nash.
Thanks. Perhaps there's this economical stance in this question, or this question is an economical one, but I think there's as well in this question entailed an ethic question. And when I come to this aspect, perhaps I would say it's very, very ambivalent, or it's perhaps again impossible to give an answer independent of contexts. And if asking, can this be a positive role model for other companies, that's exactly the question for the quest for finding a solution independent of contexts. And I think that is really, really difficult when it comes to these ethical, very ambivalent things. I think on the one hand, of course, yeah, it's the question, when taking it as an ethical question, it's perhaps the question asking, should the leader of a company employ autistic persons, though he knows or she knows that these persons will need additional helpers in his company, and then as well on the economic level, perhaps they will be more expensive as employees and so on. But perhaps the question can be compared to the question about quota, the question about if quota can help to change things, and if quota, for example, for women can help change social norms. And there again, I think it's very ambivalent. On the one hand, of course, those practices can be really empowering. This practice of this Auticon chef might be very empowering practice for autistic persons on the one hand, but on the other hand, for employing autistic persons, this company will need a fixed category or fixed criteria. When does somebody count as an autistic person? If I have this premise, I will employ autistic persons, then I will have to anyway, some way to find out whether somebody is autistic or not. And this means I have to use criteria that fix people into stereotypes. And this is the other hand. The one is the empowering side, and the other side is that you reproduce discriminations against people by calling them, by sorting them out and saying, oh, these people are autistic ones, we will employ them, and these are not autistic ones. And then you can ask, where's the border between the autistic and the non-autistic ones? It means, again, you will reproduce discriminations against people. And that's, yeah, in short. I will stop here because I hope it's clear.
I cannot as I don't know the company that well, and as I don't know the example, I think it's hard for me to judge whether this is now good or whether it's a role model. But I think what is really nice in this example is to kind of turn it a bit to the positive side, to really say, well, we often discuss diversity from an injustice perspective, and I think this is important. But on the other hand, I think we also should see, well, that there might be, in looking at these different perspectives, in rethinking the way our different practices we do day by day, that there is also a huge potential to approach things differently and maybe solve problems. And two short examples. One is I was on a field trip 2 weeks ago in Romania. And Romania faces tremendous problems, post-communist era. They don't have enough money, and we went to different villages and talked with people about associations. And we went to one village where we had kind of the classical male-dominated farmers association. And they were really depressed, and everything is bad, and it's really tremendous challenges. And the women were not really that included in all of these discussions. And it was really a bit, for me, depressive when I went there. And on the other hand, and they didn't look for new solutions. It was kind of the old habit, well, we need to find subsidies, we need to get money from EU to kind of solve our problems. And 2 days later, we went to a different village, and there the discussion started the same. It was also the men talking about, well, we need to get subsidies, how can we get these subsidies? And I think it was 10 minutes, after 10 minutes, the women started to talk and say, well, but why don't we think about new business models? Why don't we start knitting and selling the stuff we knit? Why don't we start cooking together and kind of do some tourism action? And I don't want to fall back into this women-men stereotypes, but it was really interesting to see how the entire dynamic in this room started to change, because also the male started to have a fundamentally new perspective and say, well, oh yes, and then I can kind of contribute my sheep to this huge fest. And in embarrassing this diversity in the room, different approaches, different people in this room, it was a fundamentally new way of talking to each other. And it was a new potential that was kind of found. And on a nation level, maybe a nice example is also if we talk about different approaches, diverse approaches. We are discussing a lot about whether gross domestic product is the best way of measuring success of a country. There are other countries that do it differently, like Bhutan. They are measuring happiness, for instance. And I would not say we should go for happiness or that money is bad. But looking at these diverse approaches, this might also help to really solve the huge problems I talked about before. That means that the nice thing about this example for me, and I don't know and I don't want to judge whether this is good or bad, is kind of turning the perspective to a certain degree around and say, well, yes, we live in a diverse world. Yes, there is injustice, But maybe, and I'm sure that it is the case, that this diversity is also a huge potential that we should lift and that we should profit from. And I hope also you in your studies will also kind of be aware, reflect on these differences, reflect on different power constellations, etc., etc., etc. This is very, very, very important. But on the other hand, appreciate the potential that comes out of this diversity you have in your classroom, you have in Lüneburg, you have in Germany, you have around the world.
I would agree with you in the point that you have these spaces where you can interact and where you come together and maybe also reflect all these constructions and get into a conflict that is productive and where new forms of maybe solidarity can emerge. But I disagree in the point that we should not look at the side of the injustice, because I think the dominant reading, the dominant interpretation of difference and of diversity is the one talking about potentials and different potentials. And I think Sarah Ahmed describes that as a neoliberal common now. So from inequality, this is a quote, from inequality to diversity and a form of depoliticization of difference, where diversity is a happy, comfortable term. So the question that remains open is which diversity matters and which diversity is allowed now. And I think this is a crucial problem in talking about potentials, and of course you say this is the best thing for the enterprise, but talking about the question was here about role model, and I think it may be a role model for an enterprise, but is that a role model of a society that we are building together, where you look of potentials and you classify and you which diversity matters?
Yes, for that, it's my last sentence about the quotas we talked about, if we need quotas to help change social norms. And in my opinion, I will give you a picture. We need quotas in the sense of a crutch, you know, helping the patient to find balance as long as he is unbalanced, respective he has a broken leg or something like that. And for that, we need the quotas as a top-down process. And what you told about the bottom-up, the persons, the personalities, the teachers, and all the people who are creating society do the bottom-up process, but we need both. And for that, I agree with the quota. And now we should ask the students. That was our...
Is there anyone from the audience who wants to join the discussion, who wants to voice a question or give some input to the discussion?
Would you say we need stereotypes to have diversity?
It's a really big, not to say a huge question, if we need stereotypes to make, perhaps not to make diversity, but in some sense, perhaps we need stereotypes to, or we need is sort of value. I would appreciate a more, perhaps more descriptive phrasing and say we always use stereotypes when talking about diversity. When you said we live in a diverse world, you said just in your last contribution, or you said, what do you say? All humans are different. We use the sentences here in our discussion. All humans are different. We live in a diverse world. Then I would always ask, how do we manage to perceive all this diversity? And of course, it depends in some degree, to some degree, it depends of our for example, simply our knowledge. You need some sort of knowledge to perceive certain sorts of diversity. Use this old example of the trees in the forest. If you don't know all these biological differentiations between trees, perhaps you will say, oh, there are many many trees, there's no diversity at all. And if you know more about forests and if you know more about trees, you will notice diversity. Sorry for that bad example, but I hope you get the point that it depends, among other things, it depends on our knowledge and it depends on our practices, depends on your abilities, what you can what diversities you can perceive in the world. That's the point. That for me it's important. It depends it depends to attitudes. It depends to knowledge, how you perceive and where you perceive diversity. And of course, if I take the sentence "all humans are different," I think everybody would agree and say, okay, this sentence is true. But let me take another sentence: "all humans are equal." I hope you will agree this sentence is a true sentence as well. And now you've got a contradiction and you have to do some interpretation work to explain this contradiction between the sentence "all humans are different" and "all humans are equal." That means, again, you have, if you ask me at least, you always have to think about what concepts of diversity are we using here? What does diversity mean? That's what I wanted to try to explain before. And that's a matter of never-ending reflection again and again. I think we never come to the point that we can say, oh, now we are ready. Now I've got what's the essence of diversity, and now I know, and now I can explain the word. But it's a matter because all our practices and all our knowledge develops again and again and again, and it's never fixed and stable. And thus it's. But there are always stereotypes in it. But I think I wouldn't go so far to say we need it. I don't like perhaps the need in this. Thanks.
I would like to address your question because I think the perspective you are proposing, you should try to take the other perspective, because when does the discussion about diversity emerge? It is in the USA, it is in the social movements, it is in the frame of identity politics. So that is a really important thing. It is not what they are saying or what they are telling you what you are. It is a form of politicizing and saying, hey, this is my position. This is the identity I am taking. So I am claiming rights for that. So it is a form of politics. Nah? And it is not I think this thing with stereotypes is just the other perspective. So, but if you say, hey, this is what I am standing for, this is what I want, this is what I claim, then it is not a question if we need stereotypes for diversity, but the question is we are doing diversity, we are claiming all rights for special groups that are suffering from discrimination. Well, that is the context. So I think the historic component is really important in this discussion.
Maybe we can give the word stereotypes more positive meaning when we use something like you said with the knowledge. Maybe I think we need this knowledge, or when you say a stereotype, we need what is a man, what is a woman, what is a German person, what is a something like that, to have an identity. And maybe it's important, more important to talk about the many things that are between man and woman, between the different social groups and so on, to become more knowledge, to build a more differentiate identity. Maybe. That's a positive way, maybe then.
See everybody nodding here. Yeah, I think we strongly agree with that.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if I have understood your question at first, and I'm still not sure if my answer will fit to your question. But I think one important point, because you have now mentioned, there are also positive aspects of stereotypes. And what I think is, of course, stereotypes help us also in information processing. It's quite hard always to judge every single individual on an individual basis. So, for example, in the old times, if there was someone, one hand a stone and the other hand a stick, and was coming to you and was running to you, you probably had some fears that he wants to hit you. If he was coming slowly to you and waving friendly, then the stereotype is, oh, probably a friend or friendly to me and wants to ask the way or something like that. So I think it's important also to distinguish between these positive aspects of stereotypes independently of diversity and discrimination issues, even though it's of course some form of discrimination. I would always agree with that. And you can of course be wrong with your judgment because you make it only with a group comparison in principle. So there are different aspects, and I don't know if this fits to your question, but I think it's important.
Yeah, thanks. I think that's important. Fortunately, most of my experiences are of the second case and not then of one of this fighting case, and that's why perhaps it's more interesting to talk about these second type of experiences. I would like to highlight one more point of yours. I think that's very important when handling diversity, different concepts of diversity or different sorts of stereotypes or categories. Perhaps I would like to talk about categories. Then it's very important a research strategy according to Wittgenstein, Austrian philosopher of the 20th century, to find elements in between, how he called it. It's always good when handling stereotypes or categories or fixed classes you would like to get in a more fluid form, then to look for in your research, to look for elements in between, how he called it, and that's always a good strategy for research, be it according to gender or class or racialization or whatever. Thanks.
When we talk about stereotypes, I see what you're trying to say with there is knowledge we can gain from it, but when we say stereotypes, it's like knowledge you have about someone or something else that you don't have to know. So it's, in a sense, it always is in a way negative, because without dealing with the person or the aspect of, like, I don't know what you're referring to, you're not knowing it, and therefore your knowledge or the thing you may perceive as knowledge can't be correct. So when we say stereotypes, I think it's always a negative form. Knowledge is another thing. Talking about categories is also another thing. But it's normal and natural to have stereotypes in order to be able to live in a society, I guess. But I want to just let you know stereotypes is, in a sense, a negative aspect.
Well, I'm not quite sure whether, if we think what your fellow student just voiced, that if we think of the example of the autists and think that they are especially logically thinking, then this kind of stereotype is more like an ability that they have, right? So there is no negative connotation that they can especially think negatively. Of course, I totally agree with you that more often than not, we see stereotypes in this negative connotation. But nonetheless, sometimes we can also perceive that as an ability.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but I have to answer that. Well, if we say that we are saying they have abilities, then they have their abilities. With saying, well, we think autistic people have the ability, it's not a stereotype, it might be a fact. So it's quite, It's different, but like it's not a stereotype, it's an ability they have, it's a fact. A stereotype is a thing that doesn't have to be true. Like, for example, I don't know, people with African origin can like run fast. That's something I think is true, but it doesn't have to be true. And if it's true, then it's a fact. If it's not, then it was a stereotype that was wrong.
Now we've got a discussion about the concept of stereotypes.
No, I would, you're completely right. I think there is nothing okay with stereotypes. I think that it is a social and academic laziness to think and to get in conflict and to look at the processual constructing on the everyday of different, and that stereotypes is always a thing of categorization, and it's always a thing of power, because we have always the one who is defining the other one. So there is nothing, okay, it is easy, and I think it's, and I think that these categories, of course, they make life easier. So in every culture and every moment you do have this thing that is ordering society. It makes communication easier, but I think it is a thing of academic and of social laziness. And so I don't think that that's the thing. I think, we are made for more of that.
I do not really agree. Also not that it's a question of power and the people in power state somehow what the stereotype is. And simple example.
Academia, wow.
So when I started here as an assistant professor 7 years ago, I was running around with short sport trousers and so on. And I guess most students thought, oh, one of these long-time students. And when I was smoking a cigarette in front of the lecture hall, everyone was like, and how are you today? And then I came into the lecture hall, and suddenly they realized, the students, oh, this seems to be the professor. But at first the stereotype was simply, there's an easy-looking guy smoking a cigarette, looking like he's just woke up and had his cup of coffee. This is a student. And I don't see where there's this power aspect or something like that. It's simply like an assumption about something, which is then a stereotype. So it might be, again, a different definition of stereotypes, of course. I was at conferences with a PhD student of mine who was always running around with a suit. All other professors thought, here's a professor and I'm the PhD student. Because it was simply a stereotype based on the clothes we have worn. So I wouldn't say that someone in power influences and that's what a stereotype is. So in everyday life and also in academics, because there have been academics at the conference.
I think the important thing you learn here in this discussion is really about definition and concepts. And we already learned that there might be different concepts of stereotypes. But what I kind of got out of these two statements, which I think are very, very important, is kind of the first thing, that it's about acknowledging difference. Acknowledging difference and kind of acknowledging different identities and kind of being aware of that. And the second aspect, and I fundamentally agree with you, that it's important to kind of try to understand the different person. And I would say, even if the stereotype, there is somebody with short trousers and he's not a professor, blah, 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 is not really about power, etc., I think it's still important to get to know this person and to get to know him or her and understand, well, now he's standing there with his short trousers, I can talk to him, and what is it about you? And then I start kind of a relationship with this person. And I think the professor, and I often have this also I had this before, I'm getting older, I think. When I started here, I was more shocked about the stereotype of the professor. You know, for which I perceived as a stereotype. That means as long as I was out there and sitting in the Mensa, it was possible to talk about everyday life. We had kind of a similar way we worked. We talked about on equal footing. And as soon as I came into the lecture hall, there was the professor, and this is Dr. Lang. And with Dr. Lang, I'm not talking about X, Y, Z. And I think this was the way where I perceived stereotype rather negatively. And before that, it was not really a stereotype because I was a human being standing in the Mensa and being happy that it's good food or being unhappy because there is boring food, there is sunshine out there, blah, blah, blah. And I think it's more this where I realized as a professor that this stereotypy professor thing was difficult, which does not mean that you all should stand in front of or that I sit in the row and you are then lecturing when we do that. I think there are different roles, but still just being the professor is kind of this more negative stereotype I perceive.
Yes, but okay, this is a really privileged discussion.
Sure.
So if you take all this thing of racial profiling, for example, yeah, if you have, they categorize these stereotypes, they serve to discriminate, to really be aggressive in the everyday. They really are discriminating categories that and they define who is it worth to live in peace and who not, and who don't. So that is, I think, it's a really important thing that when we are talking about this professor, it is another class, it is another really privileged situation that we have here also. So I think we have to be really, really aware of being, hey, categories saying it's just a little, they told me you are just a girl and I thought you were 30, but you are 40 and this was positive discrimination.
The disadvantaged groups suffered a lot from stereotypes, and for that stereotypes are so negative, as you told us. Thanks for that, because they are fixed and the categories maybe they are more dynamic. So we can try to open the gender categories more, what you told us before, to find the way, a category between, or many categories. We have still 17 categories in gender discourse, so sometimes also theoretical. It's interesting what happened there. Now it's 1 hour left.
I'll try to give a very short remark. I'm obliged to keep it short. Please remember the photograph we had in your lecture, the photograph of the 3 German soccer players. You talked about and said something, I don't exactly remember, I'm sorry, but you talked about there are not that much racialism.
They are full integrated in our society because they high performed level.
You took this photograph and said they were fully integrated. But of course you could have taken a photograph of whoever, Schweinsteiger and 2 others, and it wouldn't have worked in that way. And that's sort of racism, I think, in our context, and that is combined with power. Just I make the statement, because this photograph wouldn't have worked with Schweinsteiger and other less ethnical marked persons.
Why not? They are from Bavaria.
Maybe Professor Lang for a closing argument, closing statement.
Okay. We will see whether this is a closing statement. I just wanted to, because to avoid misunderstanding, and I try to make this clear in my starting remarks. I think we live in a highly unjust world, and we can only solve the problems in this world if we are moving beyond this injustice, if we acknowledge that there is lots of injustice, that there are power constellations in this world. This was just what I wanted to say, and I think it's kind of still what I wanted to emphasize with this stereotype, and I think this is important for your work as a student in the future, that you clearly define what you mean by this concept, that there are different concepts, and that you should not use kind of also this difference in defining things to downplay other sides, but really try to understand. And there this transdisciplinarity idea also comes in, because you will realize realize throughout your studies that also definitions are different, and that you can talk or that you can use the same concept without really understanding what the other person is really talking about. And I think this is extremely important, and yes, we live in an unjust world. The only way we can kind of solve these huge problems we are facing is if our world gets more just, if we acknowledge this injustice, and if we really work hard to kind of understand the others, try to learn from each other, and then hopefully also in a positive way use the tremendous potential that is out there.
Thank you very much. I hate to put an end to this fruitful discussion. Nevertheless, we kind of have to move on, as we only have 20 minutes left before we call it a day. I think that we all can take a lot of insights away from this panel discussion, which will really help you to ideate your ideas over the next couple of days. So for that, I'm very thankful for our panel here. And so let's thank these guys for giving us their time with a warm hand. And so thank you very much.